Hello again. So I'm back to talking about economics again. Um, Quite a bold statement now that China has already won the economic war. The West has already lost. Um, so if you look back in history, not too far back to the last recession, you'll see that China actually recovered the quickest. China took a bit of a bang, but they carried on actually having GDP growth and didn't actually fall into an actual recession, although they slowed right down. It continued to grow. Now, don't get me wrong, China has an incredibly serious problem with real estate, with property. You have a commercial property problem, and you also have a domestic property problem of ridiculous prices that are unaffordable. And you've probably heard about Evergrande collapsing. It's not the only one in China that has collapsed, but there's a big difference between what's happening in China and their approach to dealing with financial crisis and the West's approach. Right. For starters, since since the sort of embrace of China by the Americans, by what's his name now, the disgraced president of America, was forced to resign. His name escapes me for the moment. Anyway, they signed a deal with China, and ever since then, China has been growing. Yeah, since the 70s, very slowly at first, but more and more rapidly. And China went from being sort of a basket case to being extremely successful. And what they have done is they've pumped that money that they've made into their economy, into building infrastructure. They now have big cities, international flights. They have international road and train networks now, and more and more opportunities for the sort of poor people to go and work in an urban environment instead of just being like dirt farmers. Of course, there will always be farmers there, and it's by no means an ideal place to live. It is very authoritarian. It's a communist regime, but it has come on leaps and bounds. And the strange thing about it is, the problems that they have, really, their banking system and all that, it's their own money that they are investing. They have essentially borrowed from themselves. All the banks and the commercial companies there basically have borrowed the money from the Chinese government. And the Chinese government actually have money. They don't need to just print money. They have money. China's been buying gold like crazy for decades. And it has a trade surplus with the rest of the world. So basically what that means is what they take in is a lot more than what they spend in other countries. So, their kitty is constantly filling up with money. And, they've spent that on infrastructure, they've spent it on lending it to Chinese businesses. So, even if all that money just goes bang in his wallop, it's not like China owes any money to the rest of the world. They've been buying American treasuries for a long time, and now they're beginning to let go of them. Whereas the situation in the West is completely different. Okay, America is still perhaps just about the number one power in the world economically. It certainly doesn't have the biggest army anymore, and it doesn't produce the best weapons. And the latest reports on the F-35 showed it's a complete and utter disaster, the most expensive fighter plane in history, and yet it's a piece of crap. And meanwhile, like Chinese and Russian hypersonic jets produced for a fraction of the price actually work properly and are functional. So, despite all this money America's had over all this time, it hasn't been put to good use. And in fact, since I think the end of the 80s, um, America has ceased to be what you call a creditor nation. They've been borrowing money. They've been borrowing money ever since then because they what they were taking in sales of goods to other worlds, other countries, is less than what they're exporting. So their trade balance means that they're constantly sort of falling behind. And how do they get around this? They print money, and print money, and print money, which is known as quantitative easing. So now you have a situation where, I think the next US budget is some 7 trillion, and it's all borrowed money, all of it. Just the payments on their debt are outrageous. I think approaching there's like $1 trillion or something like that now. And look at the UK; it's a basket case as well, up to its eyeballs in debt. The EU in general is hugely in debt. Japan is up to its eyeballs in debt, following the Western model of doing things. So, the majority of Western countries are absolutely financially screwed. The only reason they're still going is they just keep borrowing more and more money and keep printing and printing and printing. Whereas, the Chinese actually, they have their own money. They're not hugely in debt. They have assets. They have property that they actually own, and they have huge reserves of gold. I mean, it's the same with Russia. Russia has, I think, a debt ratio of about 35%, if I'm right. You look at America and China and UK, and it's like, heading north of 150%. It's absolutely ridiculous. So, we are going into a recession. It's happening all across the world. Gradually, more and more countries are slipping into a recession. But the fact is, it's going to be China that recovers. It's China that produces, most of the goods for the world. China has this trade surplus. They can actually afford for things to go wrong. They can afford for a downturn. They actually have the resources and the money to survive a recession. Whereas, what's the Western world got? We've just got nothing but a big pile of debt that we owe to central banks, God knows who, to like corporations, etc. So, people are kidding themselves if they think that an economic war or even a real hot war can be won against the Chinese. But the West has no hope. It's completely and utterly mismanaged. It's the equivalent of something like imagine like your first job and you're earning like, well, the minimum wage here is like £12.70 an hour. Imagine you're on that, and then you go out and borrow like £10 million, €10 million. You've got no hope of paying it back. Eventually, if you keep on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, you might be able to make the payments for a while, but eventually you're just going to end up bankrupt, and that's basically what's happening to the West. We are on the verge of bankruptcy and collapse, and no one's coming to bail us out. No one's coming to save us, and certainly not the Chinese or the Russians. They will not be coming to save us. We've done nothing but insult them and try to destroy them economically, and in the case of Russia, trying to destroy them through war as well by this unreserved support for Ukraine, a war that Madeleine Albright provoked in the first place, and sort of just engineered the whole thing. So, in my opinion, that is. But anyway, I can't see this ending well for the West. If we're going to continue to try to fight an economic war, the best thing we could do would be just to admit defeat, lick our wounds, and try and find a way to gracefully deal with the coming recession stroke depression. So anyway, that's my thoughts on it. I can't see how things are going to turn out any other way. Maybe you've got different ideas, who knows? If you feel like I'm talking a load of crapola, please leave a comment below. And if you like what I have to say, give a thumbs up and maybe subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. That's it for now.